Imagine this. Imagine you have a very special toy. It is your favorite thing in the whole world. One day, a friend comes over and asks if they can play with it for just a little bit. You say yes, but you tell them they have to give it back before they go home. When the day is over, you look for your toy, but it is gone. You ask your friend, "Where is my toy?" And they say, "Oh, I do not know, I must have lost it." You are very sad, but you try to be nice. Then 3 years go by. You are walking down the street and you see that same friend. And guess what? They are holding your favorite toy. They didn't lose it at all. They kept it. How would that make you feel? You would probably feel like you couldn't trust that friend anymore, right? Well, this is a story about a very famous woman named Meghan Markle, and something very similar happened to her. Only it wasn't a toy. It was a very expensive dress. And it wasn't just one friend who got upset. It was some of the biggest and most famous fashion companies in the entire world. This is a story about secrets, missing clothes, and why some of the fanciest people in the world are now saying no to a princess. Meghan Markle has been told she cannot work with a famous company named Dior. This is a very big deal. Dior is one of the most famous fashion houses in history. They make clothes for the richest and most famous people on the planet. Being blacklisted or blocked by them is like being told you aren't allowed to come to the biggest party of the year. It wasn't because they were too busy. It wasn't because they didn't have enough clothes. It was because they made a very firm choice. They said they would not dress her now, they would not dress her later, and they would not dress her ever again. This was a very loud no that people all over the world heard. The reason they did this is because of a long trail of stories that have been following Meghan for years. These stories are about things going missing, people getting confused, and warnings being whispered behind closed doors. And it all leads back to one very special green dress. This green dress is where the mystery really begins. A few years ago, Meghan did a photo shoot for a magazine called Variety. For the shoot, she wore a beautiful, soft green dress. In the world of fancy magazines, designers lend their clothes for a few hours so the star can look pretty in the pictures. This is called loaning. It is like borrowing a book from the library. You can use it, but you have to bring it back when you are done. The dress wasn't a gift. It wasn't something she bought. But when the photo shoot was over, the green dress did not go back to the designer. All the other clothes were put back in their bags, but the green dress just vanished. It was gone like magic. There was no paper saying where it went. There was no one explaining what happened. It just stayed gone. For 3 whole years, people mostly forgot about the missing dress. They thought it was just a mistake, but then something crazy happened. Meghan walked out in public wearing that exact same green dress. When the people who make the clothes saw her, they couldn't believe their eyes. They knew that dress immediately because they had made it. The people who helped organize the clothes for photo shoots remembered that day, too. They remembered that the bags felt lighter when they were sent back. Suddenly, that green dress was like a giant sign. It was proof that a secret was true. What started as a small whisper about a missing item turned into a very big problem. It made the whole fashion industry look back at every other time something had gone missing. Once people saw the green dress again, they started talking to each other. It was like a giant puzzle where all the pieces finally started to fit. Other people started to remember things that didn't seem right. One person remembered a beautiful gown that was borrowed and never seen again. Another person remembered jewelry that went missing after a big event. Stylists who helped famous people get dressed started saying they wouldn't lend Meghan anything that cost a lot of money. The people who run big brands stopped answering the phone when her team called. None of these things were huge on their own. A pair of shoes here or a necklace there might just be a mistake, but when you put them all together, it looked like a pattern. Designers began to feel very nervous. They started writing little notes to each other that said, "Do not loan clothes to her, or there is a risk things will be lost." The green dress wasn't just a dress anymore. It was the moment everyone realized that something was very wrong. To understand why this kept happening, we have to look back even further. Before Meghan was a royal princess, she lived in a city called Toronto. She was an actress on a TV show, and she worked with a clothing brand called Reappear. People who worked with her back then say she was very nice and had a lot of energy. She could walk into a room and make everyone smile. One day, they were taking pictures of her in many different outfits. Everything was going great until the day was over. When the team started counting all the clothes and shoes, they realized some things were missing. A bunch of dresses were gone, but the most important thing was a pair of very expensive shoes. They were fancy heels called Aquazzura shoes. At first, the team thought maybe an assistant had packed them by mistake. They thought maybe they were just hiding under a table. They didn't want to think anyone took them on purpose. But months later, the whole world was watching TV. Meghan was announcing that she was going to marry Prince Harry. She was smiling and looked very happy. But the people from the fashion shoot in Toronto weren't looking at her smile. They were looking at her feet. She was wearing the exact same fancy shoes that had gone missing. When people asked about it quietly, Meghan supposedly said she didn't want the clothes she wore to be sold on the internet by other people. She said she was too famous for that. Some people thought that made sense, but many others didn't. To the fashion world, it was a warning. It was a sign that said, be careful, things go missing when she is around. Later, Meghan moved into a giant palace with the royal family. The royal family has many rules that are very, very old. One of the most important rules is that nothing is free. If a princess wants a dress, she has to pay for it. If she wants shoes, she has to pay for them. They keep a very careful record of every single penny spent. The reason they do this is to be fair. They don't want people to think they are taking bribes or doing favors for companies. But Meghan came from Hollywood, and Hollywood is very different. In Hollywood, if a famous person wears a dress, the company is just happy to get the attention. They usually give the clothes for free because it is like a commercial for them. When the workers at the palace tried to explain these rules to Meghan, she didn't like it. She reportedly got very frustrated. She felt like the rules were old-fashioned and silly. She thought she should be allowed to get free things because she was so famous. The palace staff grew very worried. It wasn't about the money. It was about the rules. They felt like she was trying to change how things had been done for hundreds of years. This created a lot of fighting behind the scenes. Small arguments about a pair of earrings or a coat turned into big problems. It showed that Meghan and the royal family had very different ideas about how to act. While all this was happening, something else was going on with money. Prince Charles, who is now the king, was the one paying for the clothes. He paid for the clothes that Meghan and her sister-in-law, Catherine, wore for their work. Usually this costs a good amount of money, but not too much. Catherine spent about $100,000 in a whole year. That sounds like a lot, but she went to hundreds of events. But when Meghan started buying clothes, the price went up very fast. In just 1 year, her clothes cost almost $1 million, and she didn't even go to as many events as Catherine. Designers were calling the palace and asking when they would get their clothes back. There were piles of bills for clothes that were only worn once and then disappeared. Prince Charles finally tried to talk to her about it. He wanted to be kind and explain that there were limits on how much could be spent. He wanted to help her understand how the royal family works. But stories say that Meghan didn't like being told what to do. She felt like she was being picked on. She felt like people were trying to control her. This was a major turning point. The problem with the clothes turned into a problem with her personality. The fashion world was watching all of this from the outside. They were seeing the missing items and the high bills. They were hearing the stories from the palace staff. This is why a brand as big as Dior eventually decided they had seen enough. People often ask why someone who is so rich and famous would do this. Why not just buy the clothes? Why risk getting a bad reputation over a dress or a pair of shoes? People who study this say it is all about how you think. In Hollywood, being a star means you are the most important person in the room. You feel like your presence is the most valuable thing you can give. If you wear a designer's gown, you feel like you are doing them a favor, so you shouldn't have to follow the rules. Meghan seems to have carried this feeling with her everywhere she went. She seemed to believe that because she was a star, the rules were flexible. But this way of thinking caused problems with everyone, with the palace, with the designers, and with the people who managed the clothes. It wasn't really about the green dress or the fancy shoes. It was about the idea that she thought she was special enough to ignore the way things are supposed to be done. Once the fashion world realized this wasn't just a bunch of mistakes, they stopped trying to help. They saw it as a choice she was making. This behavior followed her from her early days in Toronto to her big life in Hollywood and all the way into the royal palace. It was a pattern that never stopped. In the end, it all comes back to that one green dress that was supposed to be returned, but wasn't. It was a small thing that told a very big story. The green dress is like a symbol now. It represents the moment the fashion world stopped believing the excuses. When Dior made their decision to block her, they were sending a message to everyone else. In the world of fancy clothes, being quiet is sometimes more powerful than shouting. Dior didn't make a big angry speech. They just quietly closed the door. They did this because they believed the drama behind the scenes was worth more than the pretty pictures on the outside. Today, people in fashion offices still talk about that green dress. They talk about the missing items and the huge bills. They use it as a lesson. The story of the missing clothes and the do not loan lists isn't over yet. As long as there are missing gowns and designers who are worried, people will keep watching. When one big company like Dior says no, other companies often do the same thing. They watch each other to see who is safe to work with. The industry is waiting to see what will happen next. Will more doors close? Will more stories come out? For now, the green dress remains a mystery that everyone knows the answer to. It is the thread that ties all these stories together. It reminds us that even if you are a princess, how you treat people and their things matters more than any dress you could ever wear. The fashion world is a small place, and memories there last a very long time. Because in that world, every outfit tells a story, and some stories are much heavier than others. This is a story about how a few missing items turned into a very big problem that won't go away.